Hey everyone, welcome back. It's been a pretty eventful day in Washington, and one of the biggest stories shaping the conversation right now involves the Supreme Court stepping directly into a clash over presidential power. A lot of people have been following this situation closely, but today's development adds a whole new layer to it. The court has decided to pause the Trump administration's attempt to remove the head of the U.S. Copyright Office, and that single move has instantly raised questions about how far a president's authority really extends over independent agencies. It's one of those moments where you can feel the tension between branches of government start to tighten, because this isn't just about one official or one department. This taps into a much bigger question about how the system is supposed to work. For anyone trying to understand why this matters, the issue is pretty straightforward. The administration wants more direct control over federal agencies, especially when it comes to leadership positions. They argue that if someone at the top of an agency isn't aligned with the president's vision, then the president should have the power to remove that person. That idea sounds simple on the surface, but in the world of federal law, it's not that easy. Agencies like the Copyright Office have historically been treated as independent, which means they aren't supposed to be influenced too heavily by political pressure. And that's exactly where the conflict begins. Today's pause from the Supreme Court doesn't take sides, but it does signal that the justices want to slow things down and look at the bigger picture before letting anything move forward. There are several similar cases already moving through the courts, and those decisions could reshape how all of this works. So instead of rushing into a ruling that could have long-lasting consequences, the court is holding everything in place for now. And when the Supreme Court hits the brakes like this, it usually means they see something much larger coming. What makes this situation even more interesting is how much it reveals about the ongoing struggle between independence and executive authority. For decades, certain federal agencies have been designed to operate with a degree of separation from the White House. The whole point was to keep some areas of government insulated from rapid political swings, especially when it comes to things like copyrights, financial oversight, or labor regulations. These agencies were built to run steadily, no matter who sits in the Oval Office. But the push from the administration challenges that entire idea by arguing that a president should be able to remove any official who isn't fully aligned with the administration's goals. That tension has been building for a while, and this latest dispute has become one of the clearest examples of it. When the administration attempted to fire the Copyright Office chief, it wasn't just about performance or policy disagreements. It immediately raised questions about whether the president can override the structures that were intentionally put in place to protect certain offices from political interference. Supporters of a stronger executive say presidential authority should be broad and direct, especially when agencies have national impact. Critics argue that giving the president sweeping control would erode the checks and balances that keep the system from tilting too far in one direction. The Supreme Court's decision to delay things adds even more weight to the moment. It suggests the justices recognize how far-reaching the consequences could be if they let this move forward without addressing the larger constitutional questions attached to it. By slowing down the process, they're signaling that this is not just a simple employment dispute. It's a turning point that could redefine how much influence any president has over the parts of government that were meant to operate with neutrality and stability. And that's why so many people in Washington are watching this case so closely. Another layer to this is how many other officials and agencies could be affected by whatever happens next. This isn't a situation that begins and ends with the Copyright Office. There are people across Washington in all kinds of independent positions who are quietly watching this play out because the final ruling could shape their own job security. If the court eventually decides that presidents have broad authority to remove leaders of independent agencies whenever they choose, it could trigger a wave of changes across the federal system. Overnight, dozens of long-standing protections could fade, and positions that were once steady and non-political might become far more vulnerable. And it's not just about the people holding these roles, it's also about how these agencies function. Many of them handle issues that require consistency, expertise, and long-term planning. Sudden leadership changes driven by political motives could create more volatility than stability. On the other hand, supporters of expanded presidential power believe this would bring more accountability and make agencies more responsive. That's the heart of the debate. Is the system stronger when agencies operate independently, or when the president has firm control over all federal leadership? The Supreme Court's pause gives everyone time to think about that question, but it also heightens the sense of uncertainty. Lawmakers, agency leaders, lawyers, and policy experts are all trying to read between the lines of the court's decision, looking for clues about where this might go. And even though no one has the answer yet, one thing feels clear. Whatever the final ruling turns out to be, it's going to reshape how Washington operates. Not just in one office, but across the entire map of federal agencies that help hold the government together. All of this brings us to why today's development feels like a much bigger moment than it first appears. When the Supreme Court steps in and presses pause, it's rarely about buying time. It's usually about acknowledging the size of the decision ahead. This case is sitting on a fault line between two very different visions of how the federal government should operate. One vision says a president should have broad, direct authority over agency leadership, allowing them to steer the entire federal system in a unified direction. The other argues that certain offices need buffers from political influence to protect fairness, expertise, and stability. And right now, those two visions are colliding in real time. The fact that the court wants to wait for related cases to unfold shows just how interconnected this issue has become. If they make a ruling here without considering those other situations, they risk creating a patchwork of conflicting decisions. So instead, they're pulling back, looking across the entire landscape, and preparing for a ruling that will shape not only this administration, but every administration that comes after. That's a level of long-term thinking we don't always see in government, and it tells you just how much is at stake. For people inside Washington, the ripple effects are already beginning. Lawyers are revisiting long-standing precedents. Agency heads are meeting with advisors. Members of Congress are weighing in on both sides. And the broader public, whether they're following the news closely or just catching the headlines, can sense that something bigger is unfolding beneath the surface. Power struggles inside the federal government don't always grab attention, but when they do, it's usually because the outcome has the potential to shift the balance for years to come. What happens next will depend on how the Supreme Court chooses to interpret the Constitution in the context of modern government. If they lean toward broader presidential authority, we could see a future where presidents have far more influence over agencies that were traditionally shielded from political pressure. If they lean toward protecting agency independence, it will reaffirm the idea that some parts of government need insulation to function properly. Either way, the decision will define not just a legal boundary, but a philosophical one. How much should the executive branch shape the inner workings of the federal system? For now, everything stays frozen. The Copyright Office chief remains in the position, the administration has to wait, and the conversation in Washington grows louder with every passing day. The real impact will come when the Supreme Court finally weighs in, and when that moment arrives, it won't just be another headline. It will be one of those turning points that reshapes the relationship between presidential power and the independence of American institutions. Until then, all we can do is watch the signals, follow the developments, and prepare for a ruling that's likely to influence the structure of government for years ahead.